Michigan's 3rd District, Congressman Justin Amash.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Well, I'm not running for president, so I'll try to keep my remarks informal, extemporaneous, and brief, and then I'll open it up for questions because I think you'll actually get more out of that. But I want to thank the Blackwells for having me here today. I want to thank the Leadership Institute. You do fantastic work, and I'm always hearing about you from Young Americans for Liberty. So. Great, both are great organizations. Well, we're here at the Leadership Institute, and I guess I'll start off by talking about how it's actually harder to be in leadership these days. You know, contrary to popular belief, I actually have a pretty good relationship with Speaker Boehner. And I think that the type of leadership he offers is good leadership for a previous generation. It doesn't work as effectively with our current generation. And the reason it doesn't work as effectively is because of the internet. About 10, 20 years ago, if you were a leader in Congress, if you were the Speaker of the House, you could basically run the show. If you wanted to put some pressure on the rank and file to vote a certain way, you could really exert that pressure because there was no good way for rank and file members to get their message out to the public. It was very difficult. If you had an opinion that was different from leadership, or if you wanted to expose something that was going on, you had to have your local news cover it. And even if you got some reasonable coverage, it wasn't going to spread very far. It would just be local. You wouldn't get much coverage for what you were doing. And in the modern era, if one of us has an opinion that's different from leadership, we're able to post it online and everyone in the world can see it. And so the job of being Speaker of the House is very different from the job today from the job of being Speaker of the House 10 or 20 years ago. And I think it presents some interesting challenges to the political party system that we have. I think as time goes on, we're going to have more and more independent members of Congress. And you actually are tending toward a situation where I think in the not too distant future, you may see the political parties break down in some sense. Is this a good or a bad thing? I don't know. Our system, some people talk about having a parliamentary system like many countries in Europe have. Our system generally relies on people to form coalitions ahead of time, and then you form two solid coalitions and you go and duke it out. In other systems, they simply have different parties and then they form coalitions after the fact. So I'm not sure that they're all that far off, but at least in terms of the organization. But I do see a situation in the future where people can just be independent, they can run on their own records, they can go present their own views to the public and win or lose elections on their own merit. And to me, that's a positive thing. If you look within the Republican Party right now, there is a strong streak of libertarianism rising up that also wasn't there 10, 20 years ago. And the issues that many libertarian Republicans are talking about and perhaps viewed as more moderate on than their predecessors are things like gay marriage, immigration, foreign policy, civil liberties, corporate welfare, cronyism, transparency. These are differences, I think, between the new generation of Republicans and many of the previous generation. That's not to say that every person who is a new Republican is a libertarian Republican or supports any one of these issues or has a particular position on any of these issues. There are many young Republicans who are not supportive of gay marriage still. But I would say when you talk to young Republicans, that is a big change in the party. There is a big transition on that issue and a number of these other issues, particularly civil liberties issues in general. When you talk about things like the National Defense Authorization Act, which allows even Americans to be detained indefinitely right here on the homeland. Someone can come into your home, grab you, detain you indefinitely without charging you with a crime or giving you a trial simply because you're suspected of being a terrorist. That's outrageous. And it basically makes a mockery of our Constitution. And it's these new Republicans, these more libertarian-leaning Republicans, who are bringing this front and center. A few years ago, I would have said I was feeling pretty alone in politics, but that's not the case anymore. There are the godfathers of sort of this independence/libertarian movement. Those would be Ron Paul and Jim DeMint. Ron Paul in the House and Jim DeMint in the Senate. But now we have a lot of people who are trending in this direction. Thomas Massey, he's a fantastic new congressman out of Kentucky. We have Mick Mulvaney and Raul Labrador in the House. We have Rand Paul, Mike Lee, and Ted Cruz. They are making a huge impact, and I really believe that the future of the Republican Party is tending in their direction, in my direction, in our direction, a more pro-liberty direction, a strong belief in following the Constitution and defending personal and economic freedom. In the short run, though, we still face a lot of challenges. As I said, I think we're now better able to get our message out there. But things are still slipping under the radar, but not as easily. One of these things I want to talk about is a vote we had a few months ago that was no budget, no pay. And I really think this is one of the most misleading bills that we've voted on in a long time. It was put out there as a positive effort to try to get the Senate to pass a budget. And a lot of conservatives rallied behind it. I'm sure if you watched conservative media, there was a lot of support for it out there. I actually don't do as much news watching anymore because I find it disturbing a lot of the time. The facts are almost always wrong, no matter which news channel you're watching. But no budget, no pay was presented to the public as something that would be a positive. We would get the Senate to pass a budget. We would get Congress to finally have a budget, and if we didn't have one, no one in Congress would get paid. Well, there are a lot of problems there. First, the 27th Amendment prohibits varying the pay of members of Congress. So you already can't do no budget, no pay because of the Constitution. And there's an important reason the 27th Amendment doesn't allow you to vary the pay of members of Congress. This is during a term. You can vary it between terms, but you can't vary it during the term. And the reason is that the founders didn't want members of Congress to be bribed or blackmailed. And if you could vary their pay, you could have the administration or leadership even tell members of Congress, we will give you some money or we will take away some of your money depending on whether you vote yes or no. And nobody wants that. When I go back home and I tell my constituents, would you like me to decide whether I vote yes or no on the basis of whether I received a bribe or was blackmailed? Nobody thinks that's a good thing. They want me to vote yes or no based on principles. They want me to vote yes or no based on the Constitution, not on the basis of whether I received money or had money taken away from me. So that's an important impediment. But the bill was actually written so that Congress didn't have to have a budget. If the House passed a budget, all of the representatives would get paid. If the Senate passed a budget, all of the senators would get paid. And to this day, Congress still has no budget. There is no budget. But every member of Congress has been paid. So no budget, no pay was passed, signed into law. Congress has no budget. Every member has been paid. But that's not the worst part of the bill. That's not the most misleading part of the bill. The worst part of the bill is that hidden in the bill, though rarely talked about, was a debt ceiling suspension. So the bill was written so that from the time of its signing until May 19, the debt ceiling would be suspended. That means it just wouldn't exist as a matter of law. And the amount of money borrowed between the time of the bill's signing and May 19 would automatically be added to the debt ceiling on May 19. So it got almost no coverage in the news, but a couple Sundays ago, on May 19, the debt ceiling was increased by over $300 billion. Now, I don't think I saw any news stories actually mentioning that. I mentioned it on my Facebook page, which I encourage you to check out. I explain every vote there. But I explained it on my Facebook page, and I got over 4,500 shares because people were incensed. How could the debt ceiling have been raised more than $300 billion and no one even mentioned it? And of course, this was part of the strategy of no budget, no pay. The real point of no budget, no pay was to increase the debt ceiling without having anyone know about it. It was to kick the debt ceiling fight down the road. And by kicking the debt ceiling fight down the road, of course, that meant increasing the debt ceiling in some way that wasn't really obvious to everyone, and passing something like no budget, no pay to disguise the whole thing. So we had a debt ceiling increase that most members of Congress voted for, the president signed, and really nobody got any bad press for it. $300 billion. Now, I'm from the state of Michigan. The annual budget for the state government of Michigan is about $50 billion. So we're talking about 6 times the annual state budget of Michigan. That's how much was borrowed and was added to the debt ceiling. And Michigan's a large state. It's one of our biggest states. So these are the kind of things that are going on behind closed doors. But as I said, fortunately with the internet and with great new members of Congress, Thomas Massie, Rand Paul, these things are being exposed. And I see a bright future actually for our country if we can get more and more of these individuals elected into office. People want transparency, they want openness. My constituents aren't clamoring for me to agree with them on everything. They understand that people don't agree on every issue. What they really want to see is that you're open and honest with them about what you're doing. That you don't do things in the dark, that you are who you are. And when you say you stand for something, you do stand for it. There's nothing, for those of you who are interested in doing campaign management, there's nothing that the public hates more than hypocrisy. They hate hypocrisy. I hate hypocrisy. So if there's one lesson you learn, it's be straightforward with people, be honest with them, and you'll actually get the benefit of the doubt even when they disagree. So I want to thank you for having me here. I want to open it up for questions, and we can talk a little more about some of these issues and other issues. Thanks so much.